Recording is starting any second. Okay, great. So, welcome everybody to our latest installment of Kosher Salt. And again, I'd like to begin our session with this framing story that sets the tone and gives us a little bit of a kavanah. Let me ask a question here. Does this help?
Oh, much better.
So there you are. Look at that.
And I want to make sure everybody's seeing the rabbi and not me, because I'm just worried that if I'm presenting the document, it's going to show me instead.
I see the document in one box. I see you. I see other people.
Everybody sees something different, though, so I want to
right. Sure. Okay.
All right.
So we begin with this story of stories. When the great Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov saw misfortune threatening, it was his custom to go into a certain part of the forest to meditate. There he would light a fire, say a special prayer, and the miracle would be accomplished and the misfortune averted. Later, when his disciple, the celebrated Maggid of Mezrich, had occasion for the same reason to intercede with heaven, he would go to the same place in the forest and say, "Master of the universe, listen, I do not know how to light the fire, but I'm still able to say the prayer." And again, the miracle would be accomplished. Still later, Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, in order to save the people once more, would go into the forest, and he would say, "I do not know how to light the fire. I do not know the prayer, but I know the place, and this must be sufficient." It was sufficient. The miracle was accomplished. Then it fell to Rabbi Yisrael of Rizhin to overcome the misfortunes. Sitting in his armchair, his head in his hands, he spoke to God. "I'm unable to light the fire, and I do not know the prayer. I cannot even find the place in the forest. All I can do is tell the story, and this must be sufficient." And it was sufficient. Today's story I chose is another story of Rav Nachman of Bratslav. We've had a story of his before, and we've spoken a little bit about who he was. He was the great-grandson of the founder of Chassidut, Israel Baal Shem Tov, who I mentioned at the very beginning of our prologue. And he was a chassidic master in his own right, a small group of people. He died young. He died at the age of 38, I think. He suffered a lot of pain and suffering and tragedy, and his own only son passed away in his lifetime. He died of tuberculosis, and he had a tough time at the end of his life. He was a controversial figure. He had a lot of run-ins with other chassidic masters and groups, and he had a tough time. He created an amazing legacy of teachings that were recorded by his followers, and he has the distinction of being the founder of the one chassidic group that has no following master. No other Rebbe ever inherited his position. Everything that they do goes back to him. So there are rabbis who are looked up to in the community, but none of them was considered the next heir of his position. Like we have the Lubavitcher Rebbe. There was the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and then that rabbi died, and then there was another Lubavitcher Rebbe. That rabbi died, and then there was another one who inherited the position. And same thing with so many other groups, Satmar and Ger and Bobov. Each of those groups has a Rebbe, has a chassidic ultimate ruler who is the leader of the community. That's not the case with the Bratzlavers. They're therefore called the Toite Chassidim, the dead Chassidim, because their Rebbe is dead, and they say he's dead. They admit he's dead. but they have never replaced him with anyone else. They simply keep on poring over his teachings and documents, and they create a whole literature based on his literature. And the same thing happens with his stories. He began telling stories toward the end of his life, the last few years of his life, while he was traveling, trying to solve his tuberculosis illness. And this is actually the story that we'll have today, is the very first story that he told as a new initiative that he was creating to tell stories to his chassidim. The last time I didn't have the book in front of me, but now I do. I want to show it to you in our inimitable way. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. This is the standard edition that I'm about to show you of the Sipurei Ma'asiyot, the telling of the stories is what it's called. That's the name of the book. And the way it's traditionally published by the Bretzlovers is that it has, and now I'm going to see if you can see this, right? Can you see it? Sort of. It has two parts to the page. The bottom part is in Yiddish, and that's the original language of the stories. He told all of his stories in Yiddish, but then he had them translated into Hebrew under his supervision, and they are published with the Hebrew on top of the page and the Yiddish on the bottom. Then in the back, there are commentaries that various members of the group authored to try to understand what's the deeper meaning of these stories. So, and this literature continues to grow to this very day. The story that we're going to look at is, as I said, the very first story. And what we're reading, what I'm going to read from is not the text necessarily that you have that was available online. I'm going to be reading the translation that was done by Arnold Band, and it's in a book called Nachman of Bratslav, The Tales. It's part of a series called Classics of Western Spirituality. And it's considered the most respected translation. There are many translations that are out there. Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz made a translation into English. There are other translations. I actually didn't notice who is responsible for this Wikitext translation. This is the very first of all of his stories, and it begins with this one-line introduction in the Hebrew and in the Yiddish. He said the following: Onavi Omar, Rav Nachman answered and said, on the way, while he was traveling to doctors, I told a tale of such power that whoever heard it had thoughts of repentance. This is it. So his point is that by telling these stories, he hopes to have an impact on the listener, and it's a way that he felt might be more effective than teaching Torah in the more usual way that he also employed. He was looking for a way to touch people in any way that he could. And he at one point he apologized and he said, well, look, if you don't understand the deeper meaning of the story, at least you're going to hear a good story. So here goes. And this is called The Lost Princess, or the way Band translates it is The Loss of the Princess. Once there was a king. The king had 6 sons and 1 daughter. The daughter was extremely important to him, and he cherished her and enjoyed her company very much. Once, on a certain day, when he was with her, he became enraged at her, and from his mouth slipped the sentence, may the not good take you away, the nicht guter. That night she went to her room, and in the morning no one knew where she was. Her father, the king, grieved deeply, and he sent here and there, searching for her. Then the viceroy, seeing that the king was deeply grieved, rose and requested that a servant, a horse, and money for expenses be given to him. And he set out to search for her. And he searched for her for a very long time until he found her. And there's parentheses. Now Rav Nachman tells how he searched for her until he found her. Okay, so we should know that the story, at least in one form, is over already. The princess disappeared. Somebody went out and looked for her on behalf of her very sad and repentant father, who was the king, and they found her. Now, let's understand the backstory of that story. And this is the real story. He traveled for a long time, here and there, in deserts and fields and forests, and he searched for her for a very long time. While traveling in the desert, he saw a path off to the side and reflected, since I've been traveling such a long time in the desert and cannot find her, I shall follow this path. Maybe I will come to a settled place. And he traveled for a long time. At last he saw a castle with many soldiers posted around it. The castle was very beautiful, and the soldiers were standing around it in perfect order. And he feared that the soldiers would not let him in. But he reflected, I shall attempt it. He left his horse and walked to the castle. They let him pass and did not hinder him at all. He walked from room to room without hindrance and came to a hall where he saw a king sitting with his crown, many soldiers standing guard, many musicians playing instruments in his presence. And it was lovely and beautiful there. Neither the king nor any other person asked him anything. He saw delicacies and fine foods there. He stopped to eat and went to lie down in a corner to observe what was going on there. He observed that the king ordered that they bring the queen, and they went to bring her. When they brought in the queen, there was a great tumult and great joy, and the musicians played and sang mightily. They placed a throne for her next to the king, and she was the lost princess. And the viceroy recognized her. After a time, the queen glanced about and saw someone lying in the corner and recognized the viceroy. She rose from the throne and went there and touched him. She asked him, do you recognize me? He answered, yes, I recognize you. You're the princess who has been lost. And he asked, how did you get here? She answered, because that sentence slipped from my father's mouth. This is the place of the not good. He told her that her father was deeply grieved and that he had searched for her for many years. And he asked her, how can I free you from here? She told him, you cannot free me unless you choose a place and stay there for 1 whole year. During this entire year, you must yearn for me to free me from here. You will constantly yearn and search and hope to free me. And you will fast. On the last day of the year, you shall fast and not sleep from sunset to sunset. And he went and did so. At the end of the year, on the last day, he fasted and did not sleep. He set out to go to the princess to free her. As he went, he saw a tree, and on it grew very fine apples. He craved them very much, and he went to eat from them. As soon as he ate from the apple, he fell over, and sleep seized him. And he slept for a very long time. His servant shook him, but he did not wake up. After some time, he stirred from his sleep and asked the servant, where am I in the world? The servant told the viceroy the entire story. You've been sleeping a very long time, several years, and I, in the meanwhile, have lived off the fruit. The viceroy grieved deeply and went to the castle and found the princess, and she wailed bitterly to him. "If you had only come on that day, you would have freed me from here. Because of that one day, you have lost everything." It is true that night eating is very difficult, especially on the last day when the evil impulse waxes strong. And so, choose another place and stay there too for a whole year. The last day you will be allowed to eat. Only do not sleep and do not drink wine, so that you will not fall asleep, because the main thing is sleep. He went and did so. On the last day he was walking back there, and he saw a spring gushing forth, and it looked red and smelled of wine. He asked the servant, "Do you see this spring? There should be water in it, but it looks reddish and it smells of wine." He went and tasted a bit from the spring. Immediately, he fell over and slept for some 70 years. During this period, many soldiers passed by with their baggage trains traveling behind them, and the servant hid from the soldiers. Afterwards, there passed a carriage, and the princess was sitting in it. She stopped next to the viceroy and alighted and sat next to him and recognized him. She shook him vigorously, but he could not wake up. She began to wail about him, that all the labors performed and travails endured for so many years in order to free her were lost because of that one day when he could have freed her. She wept much about it. It's a great pity, both for him and for me, because I have been here such a long time and cannot get out. Afterwards, she took the kerchief off her head and wrote on it with her tears and left it next to him. She rose and sat in her carriage and rode off. Later, he woke up and asked the servant, "Where am I in the world?" The servant told him the whole story, that many soldiers had passed by, and that the carriage had been there, and the princess had wept and cried out, "It's a great pity for you and for me." In the meanwhile, the viceroy glanced about and saw the kerchief was lying next to him, and he asked, "Where did this come from?" And the servant answered that the princess had left it after having written on it with her tears. The viceroy took it and raised it to the sun. He began to see the letters and read what was written there, all her lament and cry, that she was no longer in the former castle, but that he should search for a golden mountain and a pearly castle. "There you shall find me." He left the servant behind and went on alone to search for her. And he traveled for several years searching for her. He reasoned that surely there is no golden mountain and pearly castle in a settled place, because he was expert in the map of the world. And so he concluded, "I shall go to the deserts." He went to search for her in the deserts for many and many a year. At last he saw a man so huge that his size was not human, and he was carrying a tree so huge that no such tree is found in any settled place. That giant asked him, "Who are you?" The viceroy answered, "I am a human being." The giant wondered and said, "I have been in the desert for a long time, but I have never seen a human being before." The viceroy told him the whole story, and that he was searching for a golden mountain and a pearly castle. The giant said to him, "Surely it does not exist at all." He rebuffed him and told him that they had deluded his mind with nonsense, yet surely it did not exist at all. The viceroy began to weep bitterly and said, "It surely, definitely exists somewhere." The wild man rebuffed him again, saying that they surely had deluded him with nonsense. The viceroy said that it surely exists. The wild man said to the viceroy, "In my opinion, this is nonsense. Since you insist, I, who am in charge of all the animals, will do you a favor and summon them all. Since they roam throughout the entire world, one of them might know about that mountain and castle." And he summoned them all, from the smallest to the biggest, all kinds of animals. He asked them, but they answered that they had not seen anything of the sort. So he said to the viceroy, "See, they have deluded you with nonsense. If you listen to me, you'll go back, because you will surely not find it, since it does not exist anywhere in the world." But the viceroy insisted vigorously and said that it surely, definitely exists. The wild man said to the viceroy, "Here in the desert, I have a brother who is in charge of all the fowl. Perhaps they know, since they fly high in the air. Perhaps they have seen that mountain and castle. Go to him and tell him that I have sent you." And the viceroy went on for many and many a year in search of him. Finally, he again found a man as huge as the former one, and he too carried a huge tree. And this giant asked the viceroy the same question. The viceroy told him the whole story, adding that his brother had sent him, and he too rebuffed him, saying that it surely does not exist. The viceroy insisted that it does. The giant said to the viceroy, "I'm in charge of all the birds. I shall summon them. Perhaps they know." He summoned all the birds and asked them all, from the smallest to the biggest, and they answered that they knew nothing about that mountain and castle. The man said to him, "You see that it surely does not exist anywhere in the world. You listen to me. Go back." But the viceroy insisted and said that it surely does exist somewhere in the world. The giant said, "Further in the desert, you will find my brother, who is in charge of all the winds. They roam throughout the whole world. Perhaps they know." The viceroy traveled and searched for many and many a year, and finally found a man as huge as the former one, and he too carried a huge tree. This giant asked the viceroy the same question, and the viceroy told him the whole story. This giant too rebuffed him, but the viceroy insisted again. Finally, the third giant said to the viceroy that he would do him a favor and summon all the winds to come, and he would ask them. He summoned them, and all the winds came, and he asked them all. None of them knew anything about that mountain and castle. The giant said to the viceroy, "Don't you see that they have told you nonsense?" And the viceroy began to weep loudly, and he said, "I know that it surely must exist." At that moment, he saw that another wind had arrived, and the giant, in charge of the winds, was very angry with it. "Why are you late? Didn't I order all the winds to come? Why didn't you come with them?" The wind answered him, "I was detained because I had to transport a princess to a golden mountain and a pearly castle." The viceroy was overjoyed to hear this. The giant in charge asked the wind, "What's expensive there?" The wind said, "Everything is very expensive there. So the giant in charge of the winds told the viceroy, since you have been searching for her for such a long time, and have performed so many labors, and money might now be an obstacle, I'm giving you a purse. And whenever you put your hand in it, you will draw money from it. And he ordered a wind to take him there. Storm wind came and carried him there and brought him up to the gate. The soldier standing guard there would not let him enter the city. But he put his hand into the purse, took out the money, and bribed them, and entered the city. And it was a beautiful city. He went to a rich man and arranged for his board, knowing that he had to spend time there because he had to employ intelligence and wisdom to free her. And how he freed her, Rav Nachman did not tell. Finally, he did free her. And that's the end of the story. So, as I said, this is the very, very first story that Rav Nachman told of the series of stories over the next 4 years of his remaining life. And this is how he chose to start. Let's see what we can unpack. How did that story make us feel? What kinds of elements of the story did we notice? So if anybody wants to begin, John, you're the first one off the mark. Go ahead.
It's puzzling. The whole thing's puzzling because it makes me feel anxious all this lost time. So the anxiety keeps increasing that he's not finding her. And then I don't know what to make of the fruit. I guess it sort of mimics the Gan Eden a little bit. I don't know. It's hard to capture. I just have feelings from it, not conclusions.
So yeah, you've noticed a bunch of things. Go ahead, Eileen.
Well, literarily, it's very much like a classic fairy tale.
Uh-huh.
The quest and a lot of threes, and the challenges and the failures.
Yeah.
But since it comes from Rabbi Nachman, it's more than a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
Of course.
Right,
but remember what he said. Even if you don't get anything else out of it, it's a good story.
Yes, it is a good story.
Oh, that's a disclaimer. It's just wise.
That's a waiver. It's a waiver.
Right, exactly.
Rabbi,
Rosie, yeah.
I get that perseverance is a very big value in this story, that the viceroy never gives up. And I'm wondering, how does that resonate with faith? No matter how many setbacks you have, you're not supposed to give up and say, well, I don't have faith anymore.
Right. John mentioned it, and you're mentioning perseverance. If you try to chart out how much time elapses in this story, it's impossible.
That's right. It's like 100
every step of the way, practically every paragraph says, and this took a year and years and many years and another year and more years, and he slept for 70 years and more years. So the passage of time is way beyond any kind of normal realistic parameters. This is about a very enduring situation, and as you say, and the key to that kind of situation that requires the passage of so much time is perseverance, right? Not to give up, not to give up, not to give up. And in a minute, Lynn, let's think. Lynn is going to talk in a second. Let's think about some of the obstacles that this viceroy encounter that he had to persist despite of, right? Let's think about what those would were. But first, Lynn, go ahead.
Well, it ties into your question that it's about faith, and he has faith, and he never lets anyone dissuade him from the belief of what he's doing, his commitment, but he has trouble following through on the actions. He has trouble with following the directions. She says, you will free me if XYZ, and he can't go there for a very, very long time. He keeps messing up.
Right. So if we think about the way that the story unfolds, first we have this very fairy tale-y, like Eileen said, it's it's the typical kind of setup, a king and a castle and a princess. Sometimes it's a prince, sometimes it's a princess. And then something goes wrong. It's not explained why the king gets angry, but he causes this disappearance of the princess, and then the viceroy
Tries to help.
runs, to find her, and one and like almost every single step here, we could just pause and just contemplate what's that about. We'll come back to some of them, but I want to point out that there's in his searching. There are two stages or two different parts to that searching. In the first part of his searching, he comes in contact with the princess, and then he loses the opportunity to save her. That's what Lynn was pointing out. Like he's just right. He's almost able to do that, and then no. So he encounters the princess. He recognizes the princess. She recognizes him. They have this ongoing mutual struggle to get her out of the clutches of the no good one, the nit gutter. And and then he almost can do it, and then he fails. The second part of the story, he no longer has contact with the princess at all, right? What's the second part of the story, dealing with? Where is the viceroy and the princess vis-a-vis each other at that point? Yeah, Lynn.
Well, he's getting help from others. He's finding the three brothers. So it's no longer actions that he has to take. It's faith that he has to have. I know she exists. I know she's where she said she was. In the first part of the story, the actions are things he has to do. But now he's trying to convince other people to take actions on behalf of his faith that he has. And eventually he persuades them to. Eventually they say, I don't believe you, but I'll do what you need.
Right. They give him that extra, whatever those cards are called, to get a little extra help. So yes, the second part is where he no longer is in contact with the princess, and he doesn't know where she is, and he has only something that she once told him, and she didn't even tell him face to face. She wrote it with her tears on a kerchief that she left with him. And he holds it up to the sun to see the faded words, and those faded, evaporating words tell him, "I'm in this special place, but you have to find me there." So the rest of the Odyssey, it's an Odyssey here, is based on his taking that shred, literally that remnant of evidence of contact, and going with it again and again, despite everything. I mentioned obstacles. What are the obstacles that he has to encounter? Yeah, John.
I think what's interesting is at the beginning, nature sort of tricks him. He's tricked by nature. Like he gets distracted by the tree with the apple and the waterfall of wine, or whatever that was. And in the second part, nature's helping him out. It's the winds and the fish and the animals and the birds. or not the fish, the winds and the fish and the winds and the animals and the birds
Right.
are helping him out, are now cooperating and not tricking.
So is that true? That do the birds help him out?
Well, they don't know, but they're not being dishonest.
They are actually giving evidence. They're giving testimony that he's wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what each giant says, that when we start first with the animals know nothing about this mountain and this palace. So as far as they're concerned, they are producing pretty compelling evidence
That's right.
that he's full of it, that he has been, told nonsense and bought it. Yeah, Mark, you wanted to say something.
Yes, I think it's the Odyssey of the Jews. It's the woman represents the love of God that man is searching for. It's a long time because it's not, and when you reach 70 years, that's a symbolic of wisdom. Supposedly, a man is wise, and even after a lifetime, he's sleeping, he fails to achieve goals.
Is everybody frozen or just Mark?
We lost Mark.
I can hear you.
Okay, John, I just want to be on record. It's not me.
It's not you. Okay, I'm recording.
Right. All right, Vay. So we'll have to come back when Mark finally figures out that he's all frozen.
Like us.
There it goes. There you go.
Wait. Mark, can you hear us? We cannot hear you. You're frozen. Maybe you should get out and come back in. Okay, Lynn.
Yeah, so similar to what Mark was saying, the princess being the way to faith, to the way to God, the way to God's love. If you don't follow the actions, and I guess in this case it would mean Jewish law, if you don't follow the teachings, if you don't walk the walk, you're in danger of losing that faith. And I'm not sure how he's saved by the winds at the end. I'm not sure how that connects, but he does persevere. So eventually he does what he needs to do.
Challenges and limitation.
Yeah.
Mark, you're in a world of your own.
Did you pre-record yourself? Is that what happened? Do you know that for the last 5 minutes we couldn't hear a word you said? You were frozen?
Oh.
He's left the meeting. I hope. I guess I insulted him.
Yeah.
No. I hope he gets back in here.
Well, the winds at the end, interestingly, the last one didn't know what the topic of conversation was. So the last one was like, I don't know what this is.
She was busy.
Yeah. So it's interesting that it sort of slips out like an accident.
Right.
I was busy helping the princess.
So let's get back to that little quirk in the story. The story has a lot of interesting little twists and turns every once in a while. Mark, it's so good to see you. I haven't seen you in such a long time. How are you? So unfortunately, now you're muted. Unfortunately, half of what you said got lost because you froze and nobody could hear what you were saying. So
Okay.
if you can say it on 1 foot.
Okay. All right. Well, basically, I was saying that the story is a symbol of our Jewish travel throughout humanity. The 70 years is the symbol of a man living a full lifetime, and he still didn't learn everything that we're supposed to, and we sleep, and we go through eons. Judaism has been around for thousands of years, and we are seduced sometimes by the plentifulness of God, and we go to sleep, and we forget about our obligations, and it's a search for God. It's a search for our meaning. And sometimes we fall asleep at the wheel.
It's a joke. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Sometimes we fall asleep at the wheel and we fail to achieve our objectives. His objective was to find her, but he was seduced by the sleep. He was seduced by the food. He took the apple. That was the forbidden fruit. We're always seduced by something that we shouldn't do, but at the same time, we keep trying to achieve the moral goals. And it's really the story about humanity, and in particular, Judaism, and how, again, as I said earlier, I don't know what you heard or not, the love of the woman is really the love of God, and God is our mother. God will protect us, and it's also our love. I mean, constantly, we talk about the marriage of us and the Shabbat. It's like a wedding, and we're constantly seeking that love. Humanity is looking for the love and the comfort, and it takes a lifetime, and we never achieve it. But every now and then we get a glimpse of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Okay.
And we get a little free wine along the way.
So this is a combination, obviously, of fairy tale elements that have symbolic associations, and you're putting up the idea that this is our yearning, our search for God, our love for God. This is on a national, historical, thousand-of-year kind of dimension that you mentioned. And it's also the drama of each and every one of us, right? It's a very internalized
right.
experience. When he first encounters the princess the first time, and do you recognize me? Yeah. Do you recognize me? Do you know who I am? Get me out of here, right? And she says, this is what the story says. He says, how can I free you? She told him, you cannot free me unless you choose a place and stay there for 1 whole year. During this entire year, you must yearn for me to free me from there. You will constantly yearn and search and hope to free me. Okay, so let's dwell on that a little bit. After all, he's going to pick a place. So that's required. She says, you must pick a place. It's the only way you're going to be able to free me. I'm in the castle with the no good one, and you're going to have to get me out. So you have to go someplace else, pick a place, stay there for a year, and during that whole year, you must yearn for me. You must yearn and search for me. Well, we know where she is. Yeah, Michael. Unmute, please. On the bottom, when you get the cursor to go to the bottom of your screen, it should open up a white bottom bar that lets you mute or unmute. There you go.
Got it. It sounds reminiscent of saying Kaddish. It sounds like a process of of yearning and praying for somebody over the course of a year. Feels almost like somebody is in the underworld, sort of like going down and the myth of Orpheus going down into the underworld and trying to bring the princess back.
Right, another mythic rescue story. Right, and this idea of a year, well, a year is a kind of a natural element of time, and the yearning. Would you use the word yearning for the basic emotion of saying Kaddish?
Well, to the extent that it's supposed to represent trying to save a soul from purgatory, and to help somebody into the world to come, I suppose it is a little bit.
So that's the very classic traditional understanding of what the function of saying the Kaddish during that year of mourning is about. I don't know that most people today, or actually, I don't know how long it's been, is whether that's really what's going on in their emotional experiences as they're saying Kaddish. I don't know if I would say yearning is the basic quality. People talk about mourning, people talk about missing people talk about, trying to honor them. But okay, but I want to dwell on the yearning because there's unfortunately, yes, we're gonna take people out of purgatory, so to speak. According to the traditional understanding, there's a redemption of the person who's passed away by our saying the Kaddish, but we don't get them back. Right? We don't actually get them, rejoined with us. Here,
But we don't know what happens at the end. We know where she's supposed to be, but we don't know if the viceroy can get there, or
we know.
Well, we do know. It's
We don't know
Yeah, I
how.
thought-
We don't know how it happens, but that's where the story sort of like,
Dropped
runs
off.
out of steam, and the end is he did it. He succeeded. He freed her.
found her.
yeah.
So,
But
let's go back to your
it's a
point.
yearning
So
on
can
both
you hear
sides.
me?
But it's a yearning on both sides. The woman and the man yearn for each other, and the woman is dictating terms for when and how they shall meet. And the man has to follow directions, but fails to follow directions.
Mhm.
It's God needing man and man needing God. And it's this marriage of needs, and it's stipulations created by God, the Torah, if you will, and us either fulfilling and yearning to achieve it, and sometimes doing it and sometimes not, but always searching. And the woman is the messenger of God, if you will.
So let's
maybe-
let's build a little bit on top of that. Yeah, who was just speaking?
Natalie.
Natalie, go ahead.
So maybe at the end, you didn't tell us how he found her, but
Just said-
supposedly she is still yearning for him. So maybe he spent a year in that town with patience and thinking of her, and that fulfilled the circumstances that were necessary to find her.
Right. So we are left with that filling in for our own selves, whether we're going to be more romantic about it or more fantastic about it. We can fill in how did he actually do it. So Natalie has a suggestion of that. It's the yearning itself over that year in that place that finally got her out, which still brings up the question: why didn't the yearning work before? Why wasn't the yearning sufficient? But it wasn't. But I want to in the last 10 minutes or so make sure that we touch on a few things that we haven't yet. We have, as I'm hearing people say things, we're reading this in a kind of a classic way of the knight, searching for the damsel, searching for the princess. It follows into a kind of the basic love story, motifs of these two people being in love with each other. But there's a complication in this story. How does the story begin again? Can we remember back to the beginning, Lynn?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. It's the king that wants the daughter back. It's not the viceroy is acting on behalf of the king, but we never hear about the king ever again. So he's sort of like the surrogate.
Right. So this Mark mentioned before, the princess is a messenger of God. If we go all the way back to the beginning of the story, the setup is that there's really a kind of, and obviously we don't want to make this into an incest story, but there's a love story between the king and the princess, his daughter, who he loves very much, and then something happens that gets him angry, and he loses it, and then immediately regrets it. But the consequence is dire; it's terrible. And then this is the way the story explains the next step. Then the viceroy, seeing that the king was deeply grieved, rose and requested that a servant, a horse, and money be given to him, and he set out to search for her. And then that's the rest of the story is about the searching. But the motivation for the viceroy, at least in the way it's indicated here, is his devotion to the king, right? Not so much to the princess, right? Yeah, a bunch of people started raising their hands. Who wants to? Eileen, go ahead.
I don't know if this works, but if the king, if we kind of almost twist it around, the king becomes God, the princess is the Jewish people who have God's been angry at, which has happened in the Torah, and they have strayed. And then the agent, the viceroy, is trying to bring the people back to God. But there are all these obstacles just getting to the people.
Right. And then the restoring, as I said before, is not the restoring of the princess to the viceroy. It's the restoring of the princess to be with her protective and loving parent, right? And then the Kaddish image comes back again in a little bit better way, right? Then the restoration is not that we're yearning to be reunited with our deceased, but to reunite our deceased with, the righteous and under the sheltering wings of God. So then the analogy works maybe a little bit better in that way. Yeah, Lynn.
So is the viceroy then the Jewish community? The king is the individual. There's so much of Jewish tradition and law that relies upon the community's actions. And again, if you're going to use Kaddish, you need a minyan. You need the whole community to take part in that, in the actions. It's not one person that gets to God. You need everybody with you.
Yeah. So how we are with everybody else is a good question. When I asked before what were the obstacles that this viceroy faced. I'm not identifying. I think that in the end, the one of the ways that this story works is because it has multiple levels of meaning, and the associations can shift from one protagonist or one figure to another. Which one is God? There are Kabbalistic approaches that can make the identities even better. There's the king is one aspect of God, and the princess is the Shekhinah, the other aspect of God. So they're both God. So and you're both right. But when we talk about the interactions that the viceroy has, he has an allegiance, right, to the court. He has an allegiance to the king and to all the other people that are part of that whole castle world. And he wants to now bring back the lost princess back into that world. When I asked about obstacles, I think that, again, the first part of the story, when he finally actually encounters the princess, the obstacles that he really has to struggle with are his own internal obstacles, right? He's yearning. He really wants to save the princess, but then there's this other deflection. Mark spoke about it. John spoke about it, right? And he trips himself up right at the very last minute. There's this weakness, this moment of weakness, this moment of confusion. But you can't blame the apple. You can't blame the stream, the beautiful stream. It's him succumbing to those temptations, right? The obstacles are somehow some flaw, some crack in his own resolve. Paradoxically,
but it's also,
one second,
I'm sorry.
Let me finish this one thought, and then we'll come back. Paradoxically, once the princess actually really disappears, when he really blows it and she disappears, and he no longer knows if he can find her. He had her right there in his hands. He knew exactly where she was. He spoke to her. He had her, and then he lost her again. And then when she disappears, then paradoxically, the obstacles that he encounters are other quote unquote people or other voices that are telling him that he's deluding himself, that his faith that he can still find her again is a delusion, is all wrong. It's nonsense. The obstacles are these other voices telling him to give it up. Come on, forget about it. And then marshaling all of this evidence to show that it makes no sense what you're hoping for. It makes no sense what you're yearning for. So it's almost easier for him to keep his yearning pure and true when the princess is not there. When the princess was actually right next to him and he just had to wait another 5 seconds for the time limit to be over and then he'd be able to free her, that he can't do. But as soon as the princess is completely out of his grasp, he's ready to go years and years and years in searching for some mythic place that she might be, if he's right in the way he read the tears. And everybody's telling him to forget about it, and he can't. Yeah, Mark.
But it's not everybody, it's the animals, it's the wind. And finally, who brings it is the wind. It's
the giant.
So it's the giant, it's creatures that are, in other words, it's the demons or the challenges in all of us as we journey through life. The winds is we have to figure out how to shelter ourselves. The giants are other people who make life difficult for us. And one of the lessons I get from this so-called fairy tale is that, try again and you'll succeed. And the other is, don't ever let go of the goal. And the goal is God, and the goal is to meet. And the other element here, as you say paradoxically, is the process makes you wiser. By overcoming these challenges, you learn something and you keep trying different ways. And the search is also critical. In other words, man must search for an ideal. It's a little bit what we're going through with our riots or our protestations with regard to the current situation of Mr. Floyd that was killed by a policeman. How do we navigate the challenges that are beyond our control? We were not in Minneapolis, but it becomes our challenge to find righteousness. That is what I think is being told to us, that the winds are the winds of politics. The giants are the giants of the military. You can kind of create analogies to what we're going through with what's happening in the story.
Okay, so I think you have to write this all up. This is an elaborate interpretation that shows a lot of connections. Shkoach. We have only a minute or two left. I want to ask about this process issue. So I tried to say that the love story begins with the king and the daughter, the king and the princess. And then you have this love, or at least loyalty, devotion of the viceroy to the king. Do we think that any new love is developed, is produced through the process that the story tells us? Is there some other love story that gets created as a result of this odyssey? What I'm suggesting is does the viceroy in the end fall in love with the princess? And does he fall in love with the princess by the time the end of the story happens? It's a little bit interesting that he frees her. It doesn't necessarily say that he brings her back home to the king. He gets her out of the clutches of the bad one, of the no good one. He saves her. Is that then, some discovery at that point between the two of them that they maybe love each other? I don't know. This is a story, as Rav Nachman said, it's a story that we can repent through. We can rethink it again and again and again and see where is our own yearning. What are we really yearning for ourselves? What do we want to hold on to in that yearning? When have we betrayed the yearnings of our heart? And how can we make up for that in the future? Thanks a million. And that's the end for today. Shkoach.
Thank you, Rabbi.